When a man grows older, he doesn't just grow in years. He grows in experience, intellect, and emotional weight. But what many men fail to understand is that with age comes responsibility, especially when dealing with someone younger, particularly a young woman who's still shaping her identity. In female psychology, the age gap introduces a deep emotional imbalance. A younger woman often admires maturity, confidence, and stability, qualities that she's still learning to develop in herself. But admiration is not the same as readiness. When an older man mistakes her admiration for romantic or emotional compatibility, it leads to confusion, dependency, and often emotional harm on both sides. The first key to understand is the age gap dynamic. Women in their early 20s or younger are often in a developmental phase where their emotional world is still being defined. They are trying to understand love, trust, boundaries, and independence. An older man, having lived through that phase already, naturally stands in a position of psychological authority. He carries the confidence of experience, something a young woman finds deeply attractive. But the imbalance lies in this. What she interprets as emotional connection might actually be a projection of her own search for guidance, safety, or self-worth. The man must recognize this gap and never exploit it. What feels like love to her might be mentorship, fascination, or curiosity, not genuine compatibility. Next comes the mentor trap. A lot of older men fall into it without realizing. They start by guiding, advising, and offering wisdom, something she appreciates deeply. But slowly the boundaries blur. The man begins to mistake her gratitude for affection, and she, out of respect or confusion, starts responding with emotional availability she doesn't yet understand. That's where emotional manipulation, even if unintended, begins. What was once guidance turns into control. A man of maturity must know when to stop playing the teacher and start protecting her growth from himself. Because sometimes, the most powerful act of care is to walk away before emotions complicate what was meant to be pure guidance. The third dimension is emotional illusion. Young women often see older men as emotionally grounded, someone who doesn't play games, someone safe. But when she starts attaching emotionally, it's not always because of deep love. It's often due to emotional projection. She's projecting her ideal partner onto him, not seeing the real person, but what she hopes he represents. And if the older man starts feeding that illusion instead of grounding her in reality, he becomes responsible for her confusion. True wisdom is knowing that not every emotional spark should be pursued. Sometimes that spark is not love. It's a reflection of the safety she never experienced before. The fourth principle in female psychology is respecting her growth phase. Every young woman is in a stage of becoming, learning to set boundaries, understanding her values, building her independence. When an older man interferes during that phase with emotional or romantic involvement, he often halts her natural growth. He becomes her emotional compass before she's even developed her own. And years later, she might look back and realize she was molded by someone else's maturity instead of discovering her own. A wise man understands that what she needs is space to evolve, not someone to lead her emotionally. Then comes boundaries and power balance. An older man carries natural power, social, emotional, and sometimes financial. A young woman even unconsciously feels that. That's why it becomes the man's duty to set the standard of respect. Never use your stability to win her heart. Never use your wisdom to make her feel inferior. And never cross boundaries that she doesn't yet know how to define. In relationships where age difference exists, the man must be the guardian of morality, not the seeker of advantage. Because female psychology teaches that women, when they feel safe and respected, evolve into their best selves. But when they feel emotionally manipulated, it can cause deep, lasting wounds. Lastly, true masculinity is not about conquering youth. It's about protecting innocence. A mature man doesn't chase validation from someone younger. He radiates calm, stability, and leadership. He understands that if he uses his experience to emotionally dominate a younger woman, he loses the essence of maturity itself. Real strength is knowing when to guide and when to step back. When a man leads with wisdom, his presence uplifts. It doesn't consume. In the end, the message is simple. Never do with a young woman what would compromise her growth, her clarity, or her confidence. If you're older, your role is to bring light, not shadow, influence, not interference, support, not seduction. Because a truly wise man knows, power isn't in taking advantage of innocence, it's in protecting it. That's how maturity earns respect, not by what it takes from youth, but by what it helps youth become. When a man is older, his emotional and mental framework is far more established than that of a young woman who is still exploring the world and herself. The human mind develops through stages, and female psychology reveals that women in their youth often live in a state of exploration, testing beliefs, discovering values, and seeking meaning. When she meets an older man, she sees someone who seems sure of himself, someone who has already figured out what life means. That sense of calmness, that emotional confidence, creates a psychological attraction. It's not always romantic at first. It's a response to emotional stability, something her generation may still be learning to build. But the danger begins when the older man confuses her admiration for romantic interest and begins to interpret her curiosity as emotional availability. The age gap dynamic creates a subtle imbalance of power that both may not notice initially. The older man has the experience, the control, and the understanding of how emotions work. The younger woman, though intelligent, lacks the emotional memory that comes from living through enough relationships, heartbreaks, and lessons. So while she feels drawn to his maturity, he must remember that her emotions come from a place of wonder, not wisdom. In female psychology, admiration and attachment often intertwine, but they are not the same. A young woman may admire an older man because he represents the emotional depth she wants in herself. He becomes, symbolically, the version of peace she desires, not necessarily the person she truly knows. When a man fails to understand this psychological distinction, he begins to act from ego rather than awareness. He starts believing that her admiration validates his charm or attractiveness, but in truth, it's his emotional grounding that she's responding to. And when he acts on that attraction without considering her level of maturity, he can unintentionally create emotional confusion for her. She might believe she's in love, but what she's actually feeling is the safety of emotional protection she never experienced before. Older men must understand that with maturity comes responsibility, not license. The responsibility is to protect her growth, not to shape it around his desires. The imbalance becomes clearer over time. The older man's emotional reactions are based on reflection and experience. Hers are based on discovery and experimentation. When conflict arises, he knows how to detach, how to remain calm, and how to reason. She, on the other hand, feels emotions more intensely because she's still forming her emotional identity. So while he thinks he's guiding her through maturity, she feels emotionally dependent, believing she can't process life without his insight. This dependency creates a power dynamic where he unintentionally becomes her emotional authority. And once that happens, she loses the ability to think freely, to